Let me tell you a story.
On the day of commencement, I went downtown D.C. for an interview and discovered where I was going was the White House.
It was a very ill-advised sledding trip. That was not pleasant.
Ouch. I had an audition for this thing called audio description. I had no idea. This was about 11 years ago.
All of this is so much more delicate than I think people might realize at first glance.
You really have to refine your powers of observation.
We are big Stevie Wonder fans.
Yeah, he can do no wrong in my book. It's just incredible.
He really can't.
That's the universe telling me that I'm in the right place.
Hey there. Welcome back to The Nomad Narrator. It's me, your host and creator, Emily. I've been making audiobooks for most of my life, and I'm an award-winning producer, director, narrator, and general lover of all things audiobook. And I really hope that your spring is going well. I just got back from New York City. I got to spend a month there for the month of April, and it was really just awesome. I always think that it is so special. We live in a world where we can order anything we want on Amazon anytime. We can get whatever fruit we want at the grocery store anytime. There's no waiting for things for so much of what we encounter anymore. And I just think there's something really exciting and unique about what the seasons do. And there is a tree that I absolutely love in New York City. It is by a little inlet from the Hudson River all the way up in Inwood, in a park in Inwood. And when I used to live up there, I just loved this tree so much. I think it's so pretty. I've even seen it sometimes when I flew over the island, landing at the airport, and I could see it because it was bright pink and it was blooming. And I wait all year for the chance to maybe see this tree or other cherry trees. I just love cherry blossoms and all the different flowers that come to life so much, and watching them bloom in order of, you've got the ones that come out right when the last snow happens, and then you've got other ones that come out right when sort of the first warm day happens, and then they just sort of build on each other and grow from there. And we really only get to experience it for a few days, a couple weeks every year, and it's just so special. And I think that it makes it one of the best months to be in New York City because everything is so urban and concrete and just a lot of humanity and having that vegetation just springing to life all around you, even in the midst of this concrete jungle, is just really, really special. So I hope that everyone else's spring is going as well as the month of April went in New York City. I think it was just an absolutely beautiful one this year. Speaking of traveling, I wanted to give everyone a little update on our road trip this summer. That is correct. You heard that right. The Nomad Narrator is hitting the road in July and August. I'm going to be taking the van out across the country for what's going to be our biggest trip yet. We are starting out on the eastern seaboard and heading all the way out to, right now, it looks like the Pacific Northwest, and then down the California coast and back again. If you'd like to stay up to date as more announcements about this are made, please join the mailing list. You can do that by going to the website, thenomadnarrator.com, and it should be a little box that pops up for you there. If not, there's a link somewhere where you can click and sign up, but I think that there's a box available that pops up right now. As we get all the guests nailed down, we're thinking of possibly building some meetup events around that schedule for narrators and even fans of audiobooks, and I think it's just going to be a really fun time, so be sure you get signed up and follow along. Now, for today's episode, I'm bringing you something that I think is going to be a really neat little treat. This is one of our open mic episodes. Those are where we have an opportunity to dive into maybe something timely or particularly interesting that's going on in the audiobook landscape. And if anyone has noticed, over the last 5 to 10 years or so, there's now a feature on almost every TV show or movie you watch called audio description. And this is a descriptive element that makes visual material like film accessible for anyone with visual disabilities. It's kind of like closed captioning for anyone with a visual disability. It also has a lot of added benefits for those of us who are sighted, and that makes this growing field a really natural tie-in, I think, for the audiobook crowd, and in particular, maybe voiceover actors who might be looking to work in both. Our guest today is Claudia Dunn. Claudia is a longtime voiceover actor who has done just that. She has excelled in everything from commercial work to audiobooks to audio description. And when I say that she has excelled, I really mean it. Claudia worked on 3 films nominated for Academy Awards just this past year. And she is not only very good at what she does now, but has an absolutely fascinating wealth of life experiences that she draws from, which you will soon hear all about. And I really enjoyed her calm and well-considered approach to everything we talked about, from following your dreams to listening to the signals that our bodies send us, to practical advice on how to do a good job with audio description and maybe even get involved in the audio descriptive market. So let's have a listen, shall we? Without any further ado, I present to you Claudia Dunn.
Hi, Emily.
Hello.
Thank you for waiting for me.
Welcome to the pod.
Thank you. Happy to be here. I'm just going to close up my room here.
Yeah. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How about you?
Pretty good. Pretty good. I recently got involuntarily bumped on my flight home. So, yeah.
So you stayed. You had to
I
stay.
stayed. I was there an extra 24 hours. The extra flight credits made it worth it. But I don't do so well with my schedule being... I like novelty and I like doing new things and different things and fun things, but I do not like it when the choices are taken out of my own hands.
Right.
When someone else is calling the shots. And yes, exactly. You get it. Unexpected novelty, not always my favorite. Yeah. So Claudia, tell me a little bit about... First of all, let me just say thank you for giving your time to be here today.
Of course, my pleasure.
It was so nice to meet you at the Audis.
You too.
And the reason that I wanted to have you on to talk about some things is because specifically of your focus in audio description, and that being such a related but different area to audiobooks that I think a lot of us are curious about the logistics of that. Like, how did you get into it? What is it like? How do you get work? That kind of thing. But also, I think that sort of the roots of the audiobook industry are really in disability access. For a couple decades before it became a commercial market, it really got its start for the blind. And it has continued to grow as something for the print disabled as well. Audio description, I think, in a lot of ways builds on that. And I'm just really curious sort of like to know a little bit more about you and how you got started in that side of things. And let's just start at the beginning. Like, where are you from? And how did you end up getting into voiceover to begin with? Is this something you've been doing for a long, long time? Or is it a later venture that you know, a lot of people have had a previous career and then they decide to move into voiceover work later on? So I'd love to hear a little bit more about all of that.
Sure. I started as an actress, as so many of us. My undergrad degree is in theater and dance. I was born in Boston, and my dad was the dean of the Boston Conservatory, so that's why our family was there. And then we migrated to Silver Spring, Maryland. My mom's music professor was, bless her soul, both piano was there, both of their instruments. And everyone in my family, I think every member is a musician of some...
Wow.
Several instruments. I play enough to be dangerous. I play piano. I was a dancer. That was my...
I am so in awe of dance. It's not something that I can do. I just am enthralled every time I watch any kind of dance. I love it.
Well, I think as long as you are enjoying the movement and whatever form that movement takes, you know, that's really about...
as the mover?
Yes, as the mover. It's lived experience of movement. And there's that old saying in musical theater, with the emotions too big for speaking, one breaks into song, and if they're too big for song, one must dance. The inspiration comes from within, so I've just got to move. So
I like to I just do movement. I certainly wouldn't call it dance by any stretch, not even like some kind of interpretive dance. It really is just kind of, I just get like weird energy throughout my body, depending on if I've sat too much that day or if I haven't walked enough or if I don't know, like I have to be constantly moving.
Sure.
And I like to just kind of move in different ways. And there's no rhyme or reason to it whatsoever. I just kind of try to feel what feels good for my body after it hasn't had enough of that.
Well, it's smart to listen to your body because it knows. It has wisdom that we don't. You know, there's something called... I was a shiatsu therapist for many years in Los Angeles, really? And there was another modality called myofascial release.
Oh my God, I love myofascial release, and so many people don't even know about it.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's not as well publicized. It's based on the meridian system, the same one as acupuncture. So electrical
Yes. Yeah.
science, there, and
It's the kind of thing I feel like describing it, people can't really get what it does. But
mm,
once you've had it, you feel it and you
yeah,
can feel the difference. And yeah, it makes such a big difference. Well,
yeah.
that's very cool. I had no idea. We didn't touch on that before when we were chatting. So
Yeah.
how long did you do?
I did a 2-year program in Santa Monica, and so I became a licensed shiatsu therapist, and then opened a private practice, and then I started doing on-set massage. So I'd be an on-set for like the Drew Carey show and a couple of other shows, and
Oh,
just kind of
wow.
haul my table around.
Oh, that's amazing. So I've definitely seen that before, like on backstage and Broadway shows and things. There's usually a massage therapist on staff. What was next?
Well,
What was before that? You were a dancer
the,
and then
yes, the trajectory was college, a lot of musical theater. I did a couple of USO tours, Europe, the UK, Egypt, and the Sinai. And then on the day of commencement, I went downtown DC for an interview, thinking I was going for a part-time job before I started my MFA program at Catholic University. I was all set to do that in theater, and discovered shortly thereafter that where I was going was the White House to interview. It was a friend from college who knew I could type fast, and that's kind of how I started there. Got the job and discovered over that time that that's where I was actually working. It was the old executive office building, which is part of the White House complex, fenced complex. So by the end of the summer, I decided to stay at the White House and for a few years and traveled with the president. I was in the press office, White House press office. I was a White House reporter stenographer. So we worked with the press and traveled with the press and kind of
so
lived
that's a
with them.
completely different direction. So you
Yes.
did that for a couple years and then you did theater professionally after that?
Yes, I did it before, and I actually did some shows in the DC area while I was there because I was,
Okay.
lived right there in the area. Um, and then I was there for 4 years, and then I left and decided to get on with it, and jumped into my
Decided to
Toyota Corolla.
have to get on with it. Can't spend all my time with the president.
I know, I know.
Got to get on with the rest of my life.
Right. Oh, it wasn't my dream. It was
Yeah.
wonderful, and I made incredible lifelong friends, and it was a great
Gosh,
detour.
that's such a lesson though. There are so many people that would just want to hold on to that for the rest of their lives. And I think it takes a lot of courage and intuition to be able to say, this isn't my dream, that I want to do something else.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I was in my late 20s, pushing 30, and it was time. If I was going to do it, I needed to do it then. So I jumped in my Corolla with a girlfriend and packed it up and drove across country and lived in LA for 35 years. Did a lot of theater, some TV, film, and then started doing voice work in the 90s, early 90s. Commercial work, industrial. Video games came later, and then the strike came, 2000, 2001, a long strike. And it was then that I decided, I better get a backup. And I went back to school to get my master's in occupational therapy at USC. So I wanted to stay in the healing realm because I was doing shiatsu all that time.
So you had already done the certification for shiatsu and that was an interest, and then you went and got your master's in it.
Yes, master's in occupational therapy.
Occupational therapy. What is it exactly? Does occupational therapy, does that encapsulate like speech therapy and other things, or is it all sort of physical therapy? I don't know exactly what that phrase encapsulates.
Right. It's kind of elusive. It's rooted in the mental health movement, and it grew out of the need to rehabilitate soldiers coming back from war, and they used the method with which they used to rehabilitate them was that whatever they occupied their time with. So that's where the occupation comes in.
Oh, okay.
Your passioned occupations. So
it's not even actually necessarily related to physical therapy, but there might be components of it.
It actually is. It's kind of the sister to PT, where if you heard a very rudimentary description, it would be physical therapy is from the waist down and OT is from the waist up, although the
Oh.
shoulder is in contention. We both kind of work on shoulders. A lot of heated discussion around shoulder rehab.
That's information I never thought I might need, and I swear it'll probably come up someday. Like,
Right.
who
Useless
do the
fun
shoulders
fact.
belong to, occupational or physical therapists? Well, there
Right.
is some contention there.
It's passionate debate around that. Yes, OT has its roots, and it has a big psychosocial component. So it's a
Okay.
big mental health piece to
See, I think
occupational
that's
therapy.
why they probably get the shoulders, because everybody taught the weight of the world is on your shoulders.
Oh,
Like if you're
yeah.
not looking at
So
it from a psychosocial perspective, then you're probably missing out on quite a bit.
I like that. I like how you think, Emily. I'm obviously so biased. So PT will have their very well reasoned, and PT really focus on strength, mobility, flexibility, like the kinesiology of it.
Yeah.
And OT focuses on what you're able to do, what's your range so that you can reach the top shelf and grab the cereal, or what do you do in your daily life that this shoulder does or doesn't allow, and let's get you doing that. What's meaningful
That
to you?
makes so much sense. Okay. I see the difference now. So I wish so much that I had gone to all of my prescribed physical therapy when I broke my ankle in college. I went sledding with my friend. It was a very ill-advised sledding trip. And there were trees at the bottom of the hill, and I ran into
Uh-oh.
one. And well, when I hit the tree, it hurt quite a bit.
I
That
imagine.
that was not pleasant.
Ouch.
But some people's bodies, the endorphins just kind of immediately. And so within about like 2 minutes, I was like, oh, I think it's okay. And so
Mm.
I tried to walk on it and I just fell down. I was like, okay, maybe it's not okay.
Yeah, this would
And
indicate.
long story short, they prescribed me all this physical therapy at school after I got my cast off.
Mm-hmm.
And I went like 4 times and then felt like I could walk and move again okay. So I stopped going, and I've had problems with that ankle ever since. So now every time I meet someone that's got some kind of injury and they're like, yeah, I think I'm supposed to do physical therapy after, I'm like, it's like antibiotics.
Go.
Don't stop when you feel better. Keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You might still get some relief and benefit from picking up because modalities have advanced since then too, like
Oh,
electrical
you think that
stim
they
or
could help me even to like go back to someone and explain like that I didn't
you
finish and they could try to help fix it?
they could certainly treat the soft tissue with modalities and
Ooh.
maybe help adjust positioning if there's bone on bone or something like that. I mean, there certainly is.
I
It's
don't think
certainly
it's
worth.
anything that bad. I'm really sensitive to like symmetry, and sometimes it'll hurt for no reason and then it goes away. And I think that's
Mhm.
just kind of that thing of like old people always say, like, I can feel the rain in my bones, and it's
Right, the
they're old enough
humidity.
to have broken some bones.
Right, coming in.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, if you went swimming with the dolphins, they'd nudge you there at the ankle.
Would they? Oh, that's so sweet. They can
Probably
tell those things. Yeah.
they can tell when a bone has been mended. They're very
Oh, that's
intelligent
cool.
beings.
All right. So you went back and got your master's and you did occupational therapy. And how long
Mhm.
was that a specialty of yours?
I did that part-time, and it was always to have it in support of my acting work. And I started practicing in '05 until just a couple of years ago when I moved to Santa Barbara. I kept one of my clinics. I was working with the geriatric population in LA and several different clinics. And I kept one for about a year, and then COVID came. And so I stopped practicing at that point.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So yeah, all of us have kind of a big shift that happened around that time, don't we?
sure. Yeah, don't we? It's a lot of ripple effects that, we're still navigating.
So
And
you were doing voiceover at the same time that you got into body work. You were still doing theater during that time. Were you still doing dance? Do you still dance?
yeah, no, I don't dance anymore. I do a lot of yoga. That was kind of and
Okay.
Pilates, it's kind of the natural
Yeah.
dancer progression. I was doing more commercial work and on-camera commercial. Then after I got the MA, I pretty much focused on voice work because you're able to do that at home. most of the time, at least auditioning. And
How
I
long
used
have
to,
you had your own booth?
well, I got to ride on my man's coattails because he had a full studio. He produced music, so I had
Okay.
his booth. So I don't know if that counts as mine. So I used his from the early '90s, and then when we moved
Wow,
here,
so
of
you were ahead
course.
of the curve. You had access to a home studio back when most people that was not something that they could offer or use.
Yeah, I was very fortunate to be able to use that. We sold our house in LA when we left in 2018, and that's what sold the house. Really, we sold it to another voiceover actor, ironically, happily.
Yeah. So let's get back to how your life trajectory ended up in this area of audio description, because
Sure.
I don't know about you, but my experience with audio description comes primarily from being married to someone who's blind and who's used it
Mhm.
his whole life. And when I say has used it his whole life, I mean only when it was ever available, which was extremely rarely. And he had
Yeah.
to, have special VHS tapes. And I don't really remember most DVDs having that as a feature that you could turn on.
Hmm.
We started dating in May of 2008, and then we weren't living in the same place, so we didn't spend a lot of time trying to watch videos or anything together. But I do remember one time when we went home to his parents' house for Christmas together, he had an old VHS of Home Alone, and we
Hmm.
watched that,
Yes.
and it had the audio description. I think that might have been the first thing I ever watched with audio description.
Mm.
And then I feel like it was when Netflix had Daredevil, the series that came out. There were a lot of blind folks that were like, this is our character, these are our stories, and we
Mm.
can't, there's no audio. Like, come on, Netflix.
Yeah.
So at that time, I think it was for maybe like the second season of Daredevil, I remember we got so excited because they released a statement that they were going to start putting audio description on all of their original programming. And
Oh,
since
wow.
then, I think it has expanded to even everything that they have. It's not even just Netflix original programming, but it seems like everything that they have has audio description. Everything on Hulu that I've seen has audio description. It's very rare now today that we go to watch something and we can't find an audio described version, which I think is
Mhm.
just absolutely incredible. And it shows how much change can happen in a relatively short period of time to open up an entire world of media to a population that has, historically been excluded from that. And
Mhm.
not necessarily that anyone was trying to, but like we just didn't have that. So I would love to hear what your experience of audio description has been.
So I auditioned. My agent called and I had an audition for this thing called audio description. I had no idea. This was about 11 years ago, I'd say. And so I went in and they just kind of threw me in the deep end.
Do you
Nothing.
remember the name of the project? Is it a film or show that we would recognize?
The first actual job I did was The Book Thief with Jeffrey
Okay.
Rush. It was a long session. It was a 7-hour session, I think. But they have to QC it in the middle of the session. So you'll take a break and they'll rewatch each reel and listening to your AD, maybe do a lot of rewrites, depending on if one person created the script and then a different director is with you in the session, they'll catch things maybe that the first viewer didn't, or they'll consolidate opinions. Something has to be, decisions have to be made about what they're seeing. Writing of the script is a very specialized skill. Um, Usage of certain verbs, and a lot of writing is really about what you don't write, what you don't
Mm.
describe, because there's only so much time between the dialogue and the essential sound elements. So, as a writer, and as a sighted person who is a writer, you really have to refine your powers of observation to what will fill in and paint this picture that is not available orally to the consumer. So that really is the first step. And there were, in relation to now, what's available, a handful of writers who really had that skill down, and specifically for audio description, because it's different from other types of screenwriting or other types of writing for commercial copy, etc. And so because we have now, I think the original training session was probably the audio description project that's still going strong, started by Joel Snyder, who's kind of the godfather of audio description. And I have a funny little 1 degree of separation story about him, about Joel,
What's that?
which is I discovered quite by accident reading some material somewhere along the line about AD that he and a woman named Margaret Fansteel created the first audio description in 1978 at the Arena Stage in DC for a Brecht play, a live performance. And I thought, Margaret Fansteel, that's too unusual a name to have several of them running around. That was my childhood piano teacher's name.
No.
So I did some more research, and sure enough, she was my father's student. So she was my childhood piano teacher.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so it was just sort of like, oh, yes, that's the universe telling me that I'm in the right place. It just felt very serendipitous.
So you do various kinds of voiceover. How many audiobooks have you narrated?
Very handful.
Just a
literally.
handful. So you're kind of newer on the audiobook side, or well, are you newer, or is it just that you kind of intersperse that with a lot of other things? Like, have you been doing it for a while, but not?
I started studying for audiobooks specifically right before the pandemic.
So a few years.
Yeah, a few years now, but it's been slow. I've been slow going with it, and I do intersperse it with AD and other work.
Yeah.
And
so you've been doing audio description quite a bit longer than you've been doing audiobooks. Do you know how many AD projects you've worked on in that time?
Hundreds.
Wow.
Maybe 1,000. Some.
Are you serious?
Depending on, how I did a lot of things at home during the pandemic, a lot of wildline stuff, just recorded it on my own with no engineer, no director, because they were back cataloged stuff.
Yeah.
So I throw those in there, then that's probably going on 1,000, I'd say, roughly estimate.
That is wild. That is so much. Okay, so you're saying that now there's a little bit more of a standard to how these things are written. Is there a standard to how they're recorded? It kind of doesn't sound like it from what you just said. It seems like there's a lot of projects that they're just trying to get description paired with backlogged. And when I say backlogged, I guess I mean it's almost sort of like in publishing, you have the front list, and then you've got your back list. So it seems like there would be, about 100 years of cinema that there's a backlist of, and that they might be trying to pair audio description with. Is that kind of where a lot of your work is coming from? Is this sort of backlist of projects?
The majority, like right now, it's all current season or just about to be released film or documentary. The backlist stuff happened more during the pandemic. I think maybe just because of the slow of production, there was time to do that. And, they were all classics. They're all great classics, so they're really fun to narrate. But they were things that would be watched, clearly would be watched, and there would be a request for them.
I've talked with a couple of people about this too. Sometimes when I hear the audio description, what you were saying about having a very specific idea of how to write the audio description, it's such a skill. I think that it can be so clarifying in certain ways, even for a sighted viewer. I think particularly, I've watched the movie Naiad about 3 times now, and I watched it the first time by myself, and I didn't realize that I had the audio description on. I didn't even realize it until the next time that I watched it with Chris, and the audio description was already turned on, and I thought, oh, I recognize this. But I realized that when I was describing the movie to him, telling him we should watch it together because it was so good, that most of the language I had used to describe the movie to him came from the audio description of things that I might not necessarily have even caught or thought of myself if just taking in the visuals of the film. So I thought that was really cool that you all are able to create something that it's that curb cut effect, I think, that Richard Riemann talks about or has posted things about, where when you cut the curb to make a ramp for a curb on a sidewalk, it doesn't just help someone in a wheelchair. It helps anyone pushing a stroller. It helps anyone with a dolly full of packages. It helps anyone, there's so
Mhm.
many different ways that it helps people. Someone with a suitcase, they can roll it up that and say, and I feel that whenever you make something accessible for one person, you make it improved for so many other people. And I don't think people talk about that enough with the audio descriptive
Right. It's
side of things.
sighted people who usually what happens is, as in your situation, a loved one is blind or vision impaired and they want to share media. They want to share a watching experience they're in the household or their friends. And so that's how they're initially exposed to it, just by, virtue of someone that they care about needing the service. But there's an understanding that sighted people have kind of fuzzy vision, and we don't always catch things when we maybe see something, but we don't really observe the detail. And that's what a good writer, AD writer, has to be able to do, is to observe what are the important details, what are the things that are being missed that you couldn't possibly consume without my writing. And so sighted people benefit from that because they would possibly would, no matter how many times they watch the film, we kind of get fixated on the first thing that we focus on, even with repeated views. So there's that. And there's also the benefit of being able to multitask. You
Yes,
can,
it almost
you
becomes
know,
an audiobook.
yes, it has that very same benefit. And as you mentioned earlier, the audiobooks are rooted in accessibility. And that was my years ago when I was just doing commercial VO. Almost 10 years, I think I read at the Braille Institute in LA. That was just a weekly thing. You would just go in and things would be requested. You'd have your little basket and you'd have either a newspaper or this dense technical book or something that someone specifically, you were reading it for one person who needed that read. And so that was, that was a great training ground. It felt very purposeful too, because you knew
Yeah.
someone one person at least was going to be benefiting from it and really wanted that material. So you wanted to do your best for them and be as clear as possible. But as
Yes.
far as AD goes, yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that's unfolding more and more so, the awareness of how sighted people can benefit from using AD, or as you said, not even notice that it's on after a while, that it's
Yeah.
not intrusive. That's the
Yeah.
best compliment you can get is, oh, I forgot you were there.
I love it when it's like that.
Enjoy those, yeah.
I really would like to get into audio description myself. It's something I have thought of for a long time, and there's just never really been a space where I thought, now's the time that I'm going to start reaching out about this.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like it's serendipity that we met at the Audis,
Mm-hmm.
and that you appear to not only be someone who has done AD for a while, you appear to be like the queen of AD. You
I would
you
say
had
that.
3 things that you described up for Oscars this year, didn't you?
Yeah, it was just a happy accident that they were wonderful projects, and all in different ways, very different things. Um, the feature film was The Holdovers with Paul Giamatti, dramedy, beautiful film, I think. The second was a documentary called 20 Days in Mariupol, and that was about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, handheld camera done by a AP journalist that happened to get stuck there with civilians. It's the invasion of a hospital and town there in Mariupol. So that it's very raw and it's evocative. It's like a newsreel. It's the feeling of a newsreel because that's what he was doing. He was reporting. It's tough to watch. I don't know that I could watch it again, but it documents the truth. And then the third was a German film, subtitled, which is a little different when you're performing AD, called The Teacher's Lounge. It's really kind of a moral dilemma story, and how misbehavior is handled or mishandled by the teacher. And it goes a lot of layers to it, but it's a really wonderful film, and I'd recommend all 3 of them. And it was just made me very happy to see that they were being recognized.
Yeah. Is that the first time that you've had projects up for Oscars, or have there been various awards? Because I am assuming you do television as well.
Yeah, TV shows have been up for Emmys or won Emmys. I did Lucifer. I did the whole season, all the seasons of Lucifer. I did want to mention something get back to something you mentioned earlier because I think it's important as far as the consolidation of AD across platforms, including in theater and network. So at this point, and I know the powers that be are fervently looking to create a central hub where if AD exists of any quality for a project, for television, any kind of media, that it needs to be universal. That's being worked on now. I'm not sure. I'm sure there are all sorts of rights issues and things and reasons why they're not. But what will happen is maybe AD will exist for a network show now, but then when it goes to Netflix,
They have to create a new one.
they'll redo it because of
Ah,
licensing and
yeah.
rights and all of that. So it may or may not be the same quality. There may not be an actor reading the AD. It might be someone who is not a performer by trade. So it's a different.
Of the shows that we've watched the whole series together, I don't think they've had a consistent narrator. I know that the narrator for Downton Abbey was different episode to episode.
That's
And
interesting.
sometimes they were British and sometimes they were American. And sometimes they were male, sometimes they were female. Like there didn't seem to be any sort of rhyme or reason to why they paired a particular voice with the show. So I've never even really thought about it, but I imagine that actually would elevate the experience to have the most appropriate voice. And I don't necessarily even know what appropriate would mean, but I think that if you were to audition multiple people and that there was one that particularly resonated with the material, like any other project,
Yes.
where you would do actual casting instead of just calling someone in that you are familiar with,
Right.
I know so little about the audio description side of things that I've never even really thought about that. I think that sometimes just when something becomes available, it's so exciting that it's even available. You don't notice the ways it could be even better. And I think you're right, though, to bring that up, that having the right voice and the right personality paired with the material could really make a big difference.
Yeah, there's a great example of that. The show Wednesday. I've heard some of it, and based on what consumers were saying, and I really wanted to hear, because they were saying how integral. It's an on-camera actress. I can't remember her name, but she did a wonderful job of capturing the spirit of the show. It's just a great example because it's such a very specific kind of quirk to that show and that little bit of darkness and a little wink and nudge. She captures it beautifully and sort of, it's very, that the style has changed and evolved over the years. It's from the performance aspect, and I'm sure you've heard that too. When I hear older AD, it tends to sound more formal, more staid, maybe more flat.
One of the instances where I do specifically remember really enjoying the audio description was for the movie Moana. I don't know who the voice was on that, but I felt that the writing of the audio description and the performance of it really added to the experience of the movie. In particular, like their descriptions of Hey Hey were really funny. It was very cute. The audio describer was very much a character unto itself, I think, in participating in the storytelling.
Yeah, that's the best of all worlds, when you have that someone who can walk the line because you don't want to insinuate yourself into the performance, and try to compete. That's you're crossing the line or draw attention to yourself. It's all you're describing, you're not acting, but you want to be in the same world as that piece of work and empathetic to the characters and capturing the tone of one scene to the next. So
yeah, and it also, I'd imagine it's quite a balancing act when you think of I think we can get so used to watching TV or film we can just get so used to all of the work that goes into it and all the different pieces that go into it feeling easy and cohesive
Hmm.
and as part of a whole, instead of recognizing how much work it took to pick this music and to mix it with the dialogue and the work that it took to do ADR with the dialogue if that needed to be done, and uh, how different camera angles were set up to tell the story in a certain way. All of these choices that get made, when they're done well, it almost feels like they aren't choices that have been made at all. They just sort of function as a cohesive whole.
Hmm.
Trying to insert and layer more information on top of that, I imagine can be quite a challenge at times because you don't want to miss any of the pieces that were put together by overlapping. If you've got this beautiful piece of music that was composed just for this scene, but then you've got more words on top of it, trying to make sure that those are placed in a way that you don't miss the emotional element of the music that's happening. I imagine it
Exactly.
just creates an added layer of challenge that's a lot more nuanced than we might realize.
Absolutely. They fit it also not only between dialogue, but essential critical sound effects, because you don't want the AD to be missed underneath
Yeah.
it either. Either way, you don't want to cover it and you don't want the AD to be missed. So it really is a challenge. And what that leads to sometimes, I'm sure you've seen, is a description will have to happen right before or a little bit after an action or
Yes, that
or a
explains
scene.
that.
Yeah,
Okay. I've always kind of wondered about that. And that is so good to know because I think sometimes that can feel like a mistake to the sighted person.
yes, right.
It's funny how similar I think the appreciation of audiobooks and audio description can be developed because I think a lot of times earlier audiences to audiobooks, I think, had that idea of it's cheating, it's not a performance, it's just reading out loud, these
Yeah.
kind of stereotypes that have been around about audiobooks for a very long time. But I think that it might be the same kind of thing with audio description. There's so much more nuance and work that goes into it than people might initially notice.
Hmm.
And it really is a very delicate balance of things and the performance and the writing and the placement choices and the mixing and all of this
Right.
is so much more delicate than I think people might realize at first glance.
And I think also that has contributed to the fact that we had closed caption much more prevalently and for so much longer than audio description because
Yeah.
simply because it's just far less labor intensive. It's
Yeah.
just transcription, not to negate that. That's what got me to the White House. So transcription is wonderful, but that's one step of translation. Whereas with audio description, as we talked about, there are many steps, and then the QCing back and forth, many players in the team. It's a real team effort to do it well.
So walk us through what a typical AD session is like. Well, is there a typical AD session? Are they all roughly the same, or is everything kind of
Um,
you're not sure what's going to happen when you show up?
there's a basic one that I personally go through. Um, I'll book the job. I'll go in. Have not seen the script. I've been given the title of the piece, so I always go online and try to find the trailer if it's a movie or if it's a show I'm not familiar with. See what I get the vibe of the show, and if I can get the score, the music, that gives me a feel for the tone.
And how far in advance of when the project is being released are you usually recording the audio description? Because I'd imagine that it's essentially already been produced and is ready for release, and they are adding this in on top of what they've already created.
Yes, this is post, and so right, things have been produced, so that's the final version you're describing. If it's an indie film, sometimes it'll take a good bit longer to get out, and maybe that has to do with funding or, just distribution deals and things like that. So I've done indie films that didn't come out till for 8, 9 months. But generally speaking, with features, they'll be out in a matter of weeks. Maybe a month to 6 weeks, even 2 weeks, depending on when the writers get the media because, then
Yeah.
they can't start any earlier than that, and they have to.
Are you, for some of these bigger films or even TV shows, because I imagine there are some very highly anticipated episodes of TV shows, do you have to sign embargoes or non-disclosure agreements or that kind of thing?
I sign contracts every week, every show, every job. So included in the contract is an NDA. It's understood, certainly, because I do episodics. I'll do it a few days before it's aired. So I'm very careful not to. I can say I did this episode, if I post something, but I never post it. There's nothing specific about anything that happens or any
Yeah.
storyline things, just what's publicly available as far as visually,
Yeah.
an icon or something.
Okay, so you find out that you're recording something, you show up at the studio. Most of these are recorded in studio. It was really only kind of during the pandemic that you did a lot at home, or
Yes, mostly because I'm in LA now. There are several services that you'll get a proprietary software from them. They'll supply you with that, and then they'll send you the scripts, and you'll do everything at home in your own time in the software within the timelines and send it right and upload it. So that's another way you can work. You can work over Source Connect if you have your engineer and director, just as with an audiobook. So I've done all of those, but generally I go in studio. That's usually
okay. So you show up in the studio and who's there and what's it like to get started? You've maybe watched the trailer, but you've not read the script. And let's say for a film or an episode, which I mean, either of those is going to be like 1 to 2 hours, probably, right? How long does it usually take and what's the process like of recording the different lines and how does the flow of the day go?
the flow of the day, sure. So I'll go in. I'll have an engineer in the room, and the directors now are they're in the cans, but they're at home. Everyone's working from home now. All the directors. So I will now have software that the lines are printed at the bottom of the screen, and there are two vertical lines that will come slowly toward each other. So with your peripheral vision, you'll see that, I have this much time to say these lines. At the moment they meet, that's when it's going to flip to the next card.
Oh, wow.
So you have to pace yourself, but you're cold reading. I haven't seen any of the script before, so you're trying to make sense and accentuate the sensical words while you're navigating the timing.
And how many takes do you usually get? Are you allowed to redo this after you've read through it once?
The media will play in real time, so you're narrating it in real time, and then until you mess up, till you flub, then you'll either stop at that point, especially if it's a proper name or something that maybe you haven't gone over beforehand. Let's say I'm doing a subtitled film, a Chinese subtitled film. The protagonist names that come up regularly that the director will give me the pronunciations on ahead of time. Depending on the director and the amount of time that they've had to prepare, we may not be able to do that until we're in real time, and we'll have to stop within the program and say, we're going to have to tweak this, or she's not really blonde, she's more brunette, we're going to change that, and that comes up 13 times. So there's a lot of changing as you go, depending on the work, how complicated it is.
Yeah.
Usually they'll have someone else do the QC, so there's another set of eyes and ears on it, someone other than the person who wrote it, because how our brains work. We'll read what we think we wrote. So that just gives it another set of quality checking. It's hard to gauge QC ourselves, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of times, if you're doing your best to just do a cold read of these things, you're focusing on so much at the same time because you're also watching the lines come in and trying to say everything correctly. And okay, so you are given the script, you're reading it cold, you're only stopping when there are mistakes, and you said it usually takes about a whole day to get through.
If it's a film, like a good solid 2 hour feature film, it's going to be at least 6 hours. There'll be a lunch break where they usually do the QC because that takes a while to rewatch. And then you'll come back and do pickups after that, which can take a while depending on what's found and if things are rewritten. They'll either rewrite during the session or after the QC, after seeing it another time, decide they want to make a change or something's not accurate. Because
Yeah.
a lot of times they don't get the media till right under the wire and don't have much time to write the script and do all the research. So they're still catching up, because they just only have so many hours to do it in and have to
You
turn it
know,
around.
I've had authors because I primarily work with author narrators. It's sort
Mm.
of a specialty. And one of the things that they say so frequently is, especially ones that's their first time narrating, oh gosh, I'm going to remember this for my next book. And I've had a couple authors that it's been their second or third book, and that they've said when I have a meeting with them, a preliminary meeting to go over the audiobook recording process, and they say, oh, yes, I did this before. I loved it. I learned so much. And I actually, writing this book, have been reading it out loud while I'm
Excellent.
writing it. And I've been incorporating things that I learned through the audiobook narration process. Do you think that audio description has gotten to a point where, as directors and cinematographers and the people scoring the music, as those conversations are happening, do you think that anyone is starting to take into account how this might be described in an artistic way to complement what the creative team is doing? Is that happening at all yet?
It is a movement. Um, a good example of that is, I hope I don't get this wrong, closed AD versus open AD. I believe that's considered closed AD, where the AD is actually incorporated from day one of production, which is a very different thing because it's included by the creators. So the intent of the AD is very true to the piece, to the work, because it's created by the same people,
Yeah.
or they're being advised at the same time that the piece is being created
Yes.
by those same people. So that's the ideal nirvana world where everything is
Yeah.
created with closed AD. I don't know of many. The one example that I give people that is a music video, a Stevie Wonder music video. It's on YouTube, and he created it within the context of the song and the video, and it's great. It just gives
Oh,
you.
that's fantastic. I've got to listen to that. I wish that we could include that here on this episode. I don't think that rights-wise we'll be able to do that. It's So What the Fuss described video. Uh, the one I'm seeing here is by someone called Jack Gold, but it only has like 1,000 views. So I'm wondering if there might be another version of it. Um, but as soon as I started playing it, the audio description came on, and it's just like part of the song, and it's really good.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
may have just appropriated it, but it
maybe
is.
so.
Yeah, yeah, probably. I think you're right on with the number of followers being suspect,
Yeah.
since it's Stevie Wonder, but you'll get the idea of the closed AD from that,
So
and
obviously, being in a partially blind household, we are big Stevie Wonder fans.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I he can do no wrong in my book. He's just
He
incredible.
really can't. Yeah.
Yeah.
He can do like everything. It's amazing. He's just an incredible musician.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
wow. So this is a lot of information that I'm so glad that I get a chance to talk to you about this. And I really hope that anyone that is interested in audio description gets a chance to listen to this, because there's so much you've shared that, even though I see a lot of people posting about audio description in different VO groups, there's not been anything close to this level of detail and giving like a full picture of what it's actually like to do this work. I've never heard from anyone what an actual day in the life of an audio describer is like, or this in-depth detail of the production process. I had no idea about almost any of this, and it's awesome to get to talk to you about it.
Oh, great. Well, I'm so glad that there was something of interest. And because you have such an educated, lived experience of the needs and the, what could be improved too, in your estimation, and kind of the trajectory of what's been available. You're asking very advanced questions about the process because you're intimately familiar with it and have experienced a lot of it. So that's great, because I'm happy to try to fill in the holes where I can. And the key is getting more legislation that requires more hours of AD on network television, and
Yeah.
to have that
Well,
accessible.
this has been so wonderful. Thank you so much. I have one last question for you that I
Sure.
like to ask everybody. If you were
Yes.
going on the Great American Road Trip, what would be the song playing on the radio as you're driving down the highway?
Oh man. Let's see. Um, well, I guess I'll just say my current obsession is the Rolling Stones through and through. I love it. It was on The Sopranos, and I loved it so much. I found it, and now I'm just playing it on a loop. It's got a great bass. It's just that bass comes in, a bass drum. It drives everything home. Like, yeah, this is good. We're doing this. Let's go. That's the overall.
Perfect. Perfect for a road trip. I love it. All right. Well, thank you so much, Claudia. I feel like we just scratched the surface and yet also got so much really wonderful information about this. I have learned so much talking to you in this call, and I thank you for your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Emily. Such a joy to talk to you.
Oh, you're so welcome. That was a conversation with voice actor Claudia Dunn. Thank you so much for listening. The Nomad Narrator is created, hosted, and produced by me, Emily Pike Stewart, for Imperium Productions, expanding the universe of storytelling. Thank you as always to our house band, Jake and Mr. Stewart, for our intro-outro music, to Claudia for taking the time to chat with us today, and to all of you for listening. If you like what you hear, please share this episode with a friend, and take the time to go to our show page on Apple or Spotify to leave 5 stars if you're so inclined, or a review in the iTunes app. Our next installment will be a Keystone episode coming at you from the great state of Georgia, so keep an ear out for that one. And in the meantime, enjoy those flowers and the nice spring weather. And I'll see you on down the road.